You never know who you're mistreating. And the employees at Grayson Enterprises were about to learn that truth the hard way, in a way they would never forget. It all began on an ordinary Monday morning. The office was buzzing with its usual chaos, phones ringing off the hook, keyboards clicking furiously, and employees rushing around with coffee cups and folders stacked high in their arms. Into this storm of activity stepped Maya Carter. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. In fact, she barely made a ripple in the ocean of busy professionals. Maya wore a simple white blouse, neatly tucked into a pair of basic black slacks. Her shoes were scuffed, her purse looked worn, and she had no designer handbag swinging from her arm like the others in the building. No expensive jewelry glittered on her wrists or neck. She carried only a stack of paperwork and a soft, unbothered smile on her face. In a place where appearances meant everything, Maya was invisible. The receptionist at the front desk didn't bother to look up from her phone as Maya approached. With a lazy flick of her hand, she pointed toward the back of the lobby, signaling Maya to use the old service elevator, the one usually reserved for maintenance workers and delivery people. Visitors through there, the receptionist mumbled without even making eye contact. Maya simply nodded and made her way across the marble floor without a word. She didn't protest, didn't demand better treatment, didn't insist on using the pristine golden elevators that gleamed under the chandelier lights. She just kept walking, her steps calm, deliberate, but every step she took was being judged. Employees passing her in the hallways barely noticed her presence, until they did, with sneers and stifled laughter. A group of interns, leaning against the wall near the conference rooms, openly whispered as she passed, "Who let the cleaning staff wander around here?" One of them snickered, "Probably here to drop off catering." Another laughed, nudging his friend. Maya heard them. She heard everything. The snickers, the side comments, the judgment dripping from every sideways glance. And still, she didn't react. In the break room, things got worse. A few junior associates stood by the coffee machine, exchanging mockeries like candy. "Did you see her shoes? They're practically falling apart," one of them said loudly. "Bet she can't even afford Starbucks," another chimed in, laughing cruelly. One woman, Jennifer, a floor manager with a sharp suit and even sharper tongue, loudly whispered to her colleague, "Some people just don't belong in professional environments. It's embarrassing." They all laughed, oblivious to the fact that Maya could hear every cruel word. But Maya didn't break stride. She walked past them without hesitation, her paperwork neatly held against her chest, her posture perfectly straight. Because Maya knew a secret. She knew something that none of them could even imagine. She knew that in a few short hours, the very same people mocking her would be begging for mercy. She knew that the people looking down on her would soon be looking up at her, in fear, in shock, in regret, because Maya Carter wasn't just some temp. She wasn't a delivery person, and she most certainly wasn't someone to be ignored. She was married to Elijah Carter, the billionaire founder and owner of Grayson Enterprises itself, the man who could, with a single phone call, change the course of every life in that building. And she was here with a purpose. But none of them cared to ask. Not one employee paused to offer a smile. Not one person showed even a sliver of kindness. They just assumed, and they treated her according to their shallow assumptions. Maya's simple appearance, her modesty, made her a target for their cruelty. In their world, respect was given based on visible wealth, designer brands, and social status. To them, Maya was a nobody, and that was exactly the mistake that would cost them everything. As she rode the rickety old service elevator up to the executive floor, reserved only for top management and honored guests, she could feel the weight of their ignorance following her like a shadow. But instead of feeling anger, Maya felt a sense of calm satisfaction, because she knew that true power didn't need to announce itself. True worth didn't need to scream for attention. It was the quiet ones, the underestimated ones, who often made the biggest impact. And by the end of the day, the walls of Grayson Enterprises would echo with lessons in humility, respect, and consequences, lessons they would never forget. With a serene smile still playing on her lips, Maya stepped off the elevator and disappeared down the hallway. They thought she was nobody. They thought wrong. And very, very soon, They were about to pay the price. Inside the break room, the whispers grew louder, sharper, and more venomous, like snakes hissing in the shadows. Maya Carter sat quietly at a small corner table, flipping through a few company documents. She wasn't bothering anyone. She wasn't interrupting meetings or causing a scene. She was simply doing her job, minding her business. But her very presence, the way she didn't fit into their polished, superficial mold, seemed to irritate everyone around her. Across the room, a group of interns gathered around the vending machine, pretending to pick snacks while sneaking glances at her. They covered their mouths to muffle their laughter, but their words carried across the room loud and clear. "Did you see her shoes?" One intern snickered, barely lowering his voice. "Looks like she got them from a thrift store. Maybe even the dumpster behind it." The others burst into soft, cruel chuckles. Another, bolder intern chimed in. "I bet she's just here to drop off someone's Uber Eats. Probably took a wrong turn into the break room." More laughter followed, louder this time. They didn't care if Maya heard. In fact, part of them wanted her to. It made them feel powerful, important, as if tearing down someone else could somehow lift them higher. But in reality, they were building their own downfall, one ugly comment at a time. And it wasn't just the interns. Even the supervisors, the ones who were supposed to set an example of professionalism, joined in the mockery. Jennifer, the floor manager with her sharp bob haircut and even sharper tongue, sauntered past Maya with a steaming cup of coffee. She glanced at Maya's simple outfit and let out a dramatic sigh before turning to her colleague, making sure Maya could hear. "Some people," Jennifer said with a sugary sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes, "just don't belong in professional environments. It's almost sad, really." Her colleague snickered, nodding in agreement. Another supervisor, a man in a tight gray suit and expensive watch, whispered just loud enough for Maya to catch. "Looks like corporate charity work has gone too far. Next thing you know, they'll let anyone walking off the street." Maya heard it all. Every giggle, every snide comment, every sideways glance loaded with judgment. But she didn't respond. She didn't lower her head. She didn't rush out of the room in embarrassment. She didn't shed a single tear. Instead, she calmly continued flipping through the documents in front of her, her pen making quiet notes in the margins. Because Maya Carter understood something they didn't. Real strength doesn't need to announce itself. She wasn't here to impress them. She wasn't here to defend herself. She was here to observe. And what she observed confirmed what she already suspected. The culture at Grayson Enterprises was rotten beneath the polished surface. Toxic, arrogant, built on shallow appearances and empty prestige. Not one person, not a single soul, thought to ask who she was. Not one thought to offer a helping hand. Not one showed kindness or even basic respect. They didn't think she deserved it. And that, right there, was their fatal mistake. Because Maya Carter wasn't some temp worker hoping for a job. She wasn't a lost delivery person wandering the halls. She wasn't a janitor who accidentally walked into the wrong room. She was the wife of Elijah Carter, the billionaire founder of the company they all worked for, the man who could destroy careers with a single word. But even more than that, Maya was a woman with dignity, a woman who didn't need flashy clothes or a designer handbag to command respect. She deserved it simply because she was a human being, and they had failed that very basic test. Badly. Across the room, Jennifer leaned in closer to her colleague and muttered, "Honestly, if people like that are allowed to just hang around the executive floors, it cheapens the entire brand. It's embarrassing for all of us." Maya's pen paused for a brief second as she wrote another note. She wasn't writing about sales numbers. She wasn't jotting down ideas for a new marketing strategy. She was documenting behavior, names, faces, comments, every ugly truth laid bare. Maya had been sent for a purpose. She wasn't just here by chance. She was part of a personal audit Elijah Carter himself had requested. He wanted to know what his employees were like when they thought no one important was watching. Now he would have his answer. And it wasn't going to be pretty. Maya looked up for a moment, scanning the room. None of them met her eyes. They were too busy laughing, sneering, and congratulating themselves for being part of the in crowd. She smiled quietly, not a bitter smile, not an angry one, but a sad, knowing smile. They thought they were safe behind closed doors. They thought they could act however they pleased as long as no one important was watching. But someone important had been watching all along, and the walls they thought protected them were about to come crashing down. One by one, word by word, action by action, Maya gathered her documents neatly, placed them back into her simple, worn leather bag, and stood up. The chatter continued behind her, louder now, more confident in their cruelty. But Maya didn't turn around. She didn't confront them. She didn't have to. The reckoning was already coming. And when it arrived, no apology, no excuse, no desperate pleading would be enough to save them. Because sometimes, the real test isn't how you treat people you think can help you. It's how you treat people when you think you have nothing to gain. And by that measure, the employees of Grayson Enterprises had failed miserably. Around noon, the entire energy inside Grayson Enterprises shifted, like a sudden, electric charge in the air. The halls, once buzzing with laughter and casual cruelty, grew tense. Phones that had been ringing were answered on the first ring. Managers who had been lounging at their desks straightened their ties and jackets. Secretaries scrambled to fix their hair, smoothing skirts and adjusting heels. Something was happening. Something big. The sleek, private elevator, the one reserved only for the highest executives and rarely ever used, suddenly dinged. Heads turned. Whispers raced through the office like wildfire. And then the door slid open, revealing none other than Elijah Carter himself. Tall, commanding, every inch the powerful billionaire who built Grayson Enterprises from the ground up. His tailored navy blue suit looked effortlessly perfect, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor with each step. His piercing gaze swept across the room, taking in every detail and every person with a calm, unnerving intensity. Elijah Carter was known for two things: his brilliance in business and his ruthless sense of justice. And today, both would be on full display. Nobody knew why he was here. Elijah almost never showed up without warning. When he did, it usually meant two things: a major opportunity or a major reckoning. Nervous energy filled the air. Employees stiffened. Conversations died mid-sentence. Interns who had been lounging earlier were now furiously pretending to work. Supervisors who had been snickering just hours before were whispering frantically, trying to guess the reason for the surprise visit. Jennifer, the sharp-tongued floor manager, quickly grabbed her clipboard, pretending to look busy as Elijah's footsteps grew louder. Her heart pounded in her chest. What was going on? Why was he walking straight across the floor, toward the break room? And then it happened. In full view of everyone, interns, supervisors, managers, even the receptionists, Elijah Carter stopped directly in front of one very familiar woman, Maya Carter. For a heartbeat, confusion flashed across the faces of the employees. Was he lost? Was he about to ask this woman to fetch something? But then, without hesitation, Elijah broke into a wide, warm smile, the kind of smile reserved for someone deeply loved. And he wrapped his arm around Maya's shoulders, pulling her in gently, proudly. A collective gasp swept through the room. "Everyone," Elijah said, his deep voice booming across the floor, echoing against the high ceilings. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Maya Carter." Silence. Not a breath. Not a whisper. You could hear a pin drop. Maya stood there calmly, her simple outfit unchanged, her worn bag still hanging from her shoulder. But now, she radiated a quiet power that silenced the entire floor. The same woman they had mocked, belittled, and dismissed just hours ago, the woman they had treated like an invisible nobody, was married to the man who owned everything they saw around them. Elijah didn't stop there. He turned slightly, his arm still around Maya, and his eyes, sharp as razors, scanned the faces of the stunned employees. "I hear," Elijah continued, "that first impressions matter a lot around here." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer's face had gone ghost pale. The interns stood frozen, clutching their phones and papers as if they might shield them from the storm that was clearly coming. "Today," Elijah said, his voice like ice wrapped in velvet, "you all had the rare opportunity to show who you truly are when you think no one's watching." Maya said nothing. She didn't have to. Elijah's words were cutting deep enough. Some of you showed kindness. Some of you showed professionalism. He paused, letting the hope flicker for a split second. But many of you, he said, his voice dropping lower, colder, showed cruelty, arrogance, disrespect. Heads lowered, eyes darted to the floor. He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. The sheer weight of his disappointment was heavier than any screaming could have been. You treated someone you thought was beneath you with disdain, Elijah said. You mocked her shoes. You whispered about her appearance. You laughed behind her back. He glanced down at Maya, his gaze softening for just a moment, before hardening again as he turned back to the room. And you did it because you thought she was nobody. Another heavy pause filled the air, thick with guilt and fear. Jennifer looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. The interns had gone completely silent, their faces burning with shame. And if that's how you treat nobody, Elijah continued, then you have no place in this company. Maya finally lifted her head fully and met the eyes of the crowd. She wasn't angry. She wasn't vindictive. She was just disappointed. And somehow, that disappointment cut deeper than any shouting or firing ever could. Elijah straightened, his decision already made. Effective immediately, he said. There will be changes. Real changes. Permanent ones. The people who had mocked, sneered, and gossiped were about to learn what real accountability looked like. And it all started with a woman they never bothered to respect. The woman who, with nothing more than kindness and quiet dignity, had exposed everything wrong with the heart of Grayson Enterprises. The reckoning had begun, and it was only just getting started. The air inside Grayson Enterprises had turned thick, heavy with fear, regret, and the sinking realization that nothing would ever be the same again. Elijah Carter's warm smile was long gone. Now his face was carved from stone, sharp, cold, and unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice carried the finality of a hammer striking an anvil. I've been reviewing how our staff treat people they think are beneath them, he said, his eyes cutting across the room like lasers. Today was a test, and many of you failed miserably. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few employees shifted on their feet. Some looked down at their shoes, too ashamed to meet his gaze. Others nervously wrung their hands, their minds racing for excuses that might save them. Jennifer, the floor manager who had led much of the mockery earlier, turned a deep shade of red. Sweat beaded at her temples as she forced herself to step forward, her voice trembling. I didn't know she was, Jennifer began, trying desperately to salvage her sinking career. But Elijah cut her off with a raised hand, his voice sharp and slicing. Exactly, he said, his tone like a blade. You didn't know, and you didn't care. The weight of those words hung in the air like a noose. It wasn't about Maya being his wife. It wasn't about power or status or appearances. It was about basic human decency, and they had failed the most basic test of all. Without another word, Elijah reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. He held it up briefly for everyone to see. The silence in the room so profound that even the faint crinkle of the paper echoed like thunder. On it were names. Names he had personally written down, based on the reports from Maya, the security cameras, and his own quiet observations over the past few hours. Names of those who had mocked, belittled, and disrespected the woman they had assumed was nobody. The reckoning was no longer coming. It was here, effective immediately, Elijah declared, his voice unwavering. Anyone who mistreated Maya Carter is terminated. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Panic spread like wildfire. Employees glanced at one another with wide, frantic eyes, whispering desperately under their breath. Who was on the list? Was it them? Was it their friends? Before anyone could protest, uniformed security guards stepped forward from the shadows of the lobby, moving with quiet precision. Elijah began reading names from the list, one by one. Each name was a sentence. Each sentence was final. The guards approached the named individuals swiftly but respectfully, escorting them toward the elevators, without a word. Jennifer's name was among the first. Her face crumpled in horror as she stumbled back, pleading, Mr. Carter, please. I've been with the company for years. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Elijah didn't even blink. That's the problem, he said coldly. You judge someone not on character, but on appearances. As Jennifer was led away, tears streaming down her face, the remaining employees stood frozen, watching as more and more of their colleagues were escorted out. Some tried to plead their case. Sir, it was just a joke. I didn't mean any harm. I was just following what everyone else was doing. Excuses. 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 But Elijah remained unmoved, because this wasn't about intent anymore. This was about impact, about culture, about building a company where dignity mattered more than flashy titles or expensive suits. And there was no room left for those who didn't understand that. Meanwhile, Maya stood quietly at his side, head held high, back straight, heart steady. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smiling in satisfaction. Because for Maya, this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Justice for every overlooked assistant, every underappreciated worker, every quiet soul who had been judged, mocked, or dismissed simply because they didn't look the part. The process continued methodically. Some employees packed up their belongings with shaking hands. Others left with their heads bowed, shame burning their faces. One intern, a young man who had laughed the loudest in the break room, dropped his laptop on the way out, scattering papers across the floor. No one moved to help him. No more alliances. No more whispers. Just silence. When the last name was read and the last person escorted away, Elijah folded the paper neatly and slipped it back into his pocket. He turned to the remaining employees, the ones who had treated Maya with basic respect, or at least remained neutral, and gave a slow, meaningful nod. You will help rebuild this company, Elijah said. Starting today. There was no cheering, no applause, just a heavy, collective understanding that the rules had changed. Maya gave one final glance around the room, her expression soft but firm. Not angry, not bitter, just a quiet message. Kindness matters. Always. As she and Elijah turned and walked toward the executive elevators together, the crowd watched them go. Two figures side by side, one who commanded billions, and one who had taught a billion-dollar lesson without raising her voice. The doors closed behind them with a soft ding, and Grayson Enterprises would never be the same again. The storm had passed. The hallways of Grayson Enterprises were eerily quiet after the mass firings. The seats once occupied by arrogant, cruel faces now sat empty, a stark reminder of what had just happened. But this wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, and Elijah Carter was determined to make sure of it. Shortly after the final termination papers were signed, Elijah called a meeting. Not in a conference room, not behind closed doors, but right there, in the heart of the office floor, where everyone could see each other face to face. The remaining employees, a humbled, shaken group, gathered, forming a loose circle around Elijah and Maya. There were no podiums, no microphones, no corporate fluff, just truth. Elijah's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faces in front of him. He wasn't looking for fear. He was looking for sincerity, for understanding. And when he spoke, his voice was firm, but not angry. I want to make one thing crystal clear, Elijah began, his deep voice slicing through the heavy silence. This company will be built on respect, kindness, and human decency, or it won't be built at all. His words hit like a wave. Some employees nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his message. Others blinked rapidly, fighting back tears, not from fear, but from a deep, soul-stirring realization that the place they worked at could, finally, be something better, something right. Elijah turned slightly then, giving the floor to Maya. It was the first time she would speak to them, not just as Elijah Carter's wife, but as her own powerful presence. Maya stepped forward with quiet strength. She wasn't dressed any differently. She still wore her simple clothes, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, her worn leather bag slung over one shoulder. But when she spoke, her voice filled the room with a calm, undeniable authority. I'm not here because of who my husband is, Maya said, her voice steady, but carrying an edge of fire beneath it. I'm here because every single person, no matter where they come from, what they wear, or what title they hold, deserves dignity. You could feel her words sinking deep into the bones of every person standing there. Her gaze swept the room, resting for a moment on the interns, the secretaries, even the senior executives. Whether someone is a billionaire's wife, Maya continued, a janitor, an intern, or a visitor, they are human beings first, and that will be honored here. A long, heavy silence followed, but it wasn't the kind of silence filled with fear anymore. It was filled with reflection, with hope. That day, that moment, marked a new beginning for Grayson Enterprises. Elijah didn't waste time turning words into action. Within hours, an emergency leadership meeting was called. Policies that had been ignored or treated like afterthoughts were ripped up and rewritten. Mandatory sensitivity and empathy training was launched across all departments. Not the half-hearted, check-the-box kind, real, hard-hitting workshops led by experts who wouldn't let employees hide behind excuses. Hiring practices were overhauled from top to bottom. Interviews now focused not only on qualifications, but on a candidate's respect for others, their emotional intelligence, and their willingness to uphold a culture of kindness. Mentorship programs were established for interns and entry-level staff, giving them direct access to leadership so their voices could never be overlooked again. Anonymous reporting systems were installed so that anyone could safely speak up if they witnessed mistreatment without fear of retaliation. The change wasn't easy. Some employees, still clinging to the old toxic ways, quit in protest, and that was fine. Elijah made it clear, if compassion is a problem for you, you don't belong here. Others stayed, not because they had to, but because they wanted to be part of something better. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. Smiles became genuine. Apologies were made without being asked. Supervisors started asking interns for their ideas and actually listening. People learned each other's names. Birthdays were celebrated, not ignored. Victories, big and small, were shared as a community, not hoarded by individuals trying to climb some invisible corporate ladder. And throughout it all, Maya remained quietly involved. She didn't demand a title. She didn't insist on power. But she became a symbol, a living reminder that no one is invisible. Grayson Enterprises, once just another cold corporate machine, was now becoming a place where humanity was prioritized over hierarchy. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. One afternoon, months later, a young intern named Sophie, the same one who had once hesitated to speak to Maya, approached her during a company event. "Mrs. Carter," she said nervously, "I just wanted to say thank you for giving people like me a chance to be seen." Maya smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder. "You were always worth seeing," Maya said softly. "You just needed a place that remembered that." And thanks to her courage, thanks to Elijah's support, and thanks to the hard lessons learned that day, Grayson Enterprises would never forget again. All because one simple black woman refused to let ignorance define her worth, and instead redefined what success, respect, and leadership looked like for everyone. The story of Maya Carter didn't stay within the walls of Grayson Enterprises for long. It exploded like wildfire. Within days, whispers turned into headlines. Local news stations picked up the story first, reporting on the mysterious mass firings at one of the city's biggest corporations. Then came the blogs, the podcasts, the viral social media posts. Hashtag Maya Carter trended across platforms. Influencers, activists, corporate leaders, even celebrities weighed in. Thousands praised her quiet strength, calling her the storm no one saw coming. Millions were inspired by Elijah's swift, no-nonsense support of his wife, not just because she was his partner, but because she was a human being who deserved respect, period. Articles titled "The Woman Who Changed Corporate Culture Without Saying a Word" filled timelines. Podcasts dove deep into the psychology of snap judgments and classism, using Maya's story as a stark example of how dangerous assumptions can be. Comment sections flooded with people reflecting on their own workplaces, some realizing, for the first time, how often kindness is dismissed and cruelty rewarded. You never know who you're mistreating. One viral tweet read, "Today it's a nobody. Tomorrow it's the boss's wife. Treat everyone with respect." As for the employees who once laughed behind closed doors, those who whispered cruel jokes about Maya's clothes, her shoes, her quietness. Their names were not protected. Screenshots leaked. Anonymous testimony surfaced. Some tried to defend themselves. Some apologized publicly. But it was too late. They became cautionary tales, living reminders that treating people poorly based on their appearance, their status, or their silence could cost you everything. A few of them struggled to find new jobs afterward. Companies were wary. Who wants to hire someone whose name is associated with arrogance and cruelty? It wasn't revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. And the world was watching. Meanwhile, inside Grayson Enterprises, the transformation continued. The employees who remained embraced the new culture with open arms. New hires brought fresh energy. People who valued compassion, collaboration, and respect above all else. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't bask in attention. She quietly stepped back into the life she had always lived, filled with grace, humility, and a deep-rooted strength that didn't need the spotlight to be powerful. You wouldn't find her giving flashy interviews or chasing media appearances. When reporters asked her for comment, she simply smiled and said, "I'm just happy people are thinking more about how they treat each other. That's enough for me." She knew something most people forgot. Real power isn't loud. It's not flashy. It doesn't need to announce itself. Real power moves quietly, reshaping everything in its path without ever raising its voice. Maya understood that sometimes the strongest storms are the quietest ones, the ones that roll in without warning and leave behind a world forever changed. And change she did. Grayson Enterprises became a model for other companies across the country. Other CEOs took notice, implementing their own sensitivity trainings, reevaluating hiring practices, creating spaces where interns and assistants and janitors were treated with the same respect as executives. It wasn't just about avoiding lawsuits or bad press. It was about humanity. Maya's story reminded the world that dignity is not earned by status. It is a right. It doesn't matter if someone walks into a building in designer heels or worn-out sneakers. Their value isn't determined by the labels they wear, but by the simple fact that they exist. And no one has the right to strip that away. At Grayson Enterprises, a photo hung in the lobby. A candid shot of Maya standing beside Elijah on that unforgettable day, her posture calm, her expression steady. Beneath it, a simple plaque read, "Character is revealed in how you treat those you think you don't need." Visitors would often stop to read it. Some would snap a picture. Others would just stand there, letting the truth of it settle deep into their hearts. Maya never asked for recognition. She never demanded apologies. She didn't need to. The impact spoke for itself, louder than any headline, louder than any scandal, louder than any speech. And as the years went by, when people spoke of the great shifts in corporate culture, they would always remember the simple black woman who walked into a grand building wearing a modest outfit and carrying a quiet, unstoppable power. They would remember how the world changed, not because she shouted, but because she stood tall, because she knew her worth, and because she refused, silently but fiercely, to let anyone forget it.